is the Big 12 so good it's actually bad for college basketball? And it should be a Baylor win tomorrow, but how close are Baylor and TCU on the basketball court anyway? This is a crossover edition, Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from ESPN Central Texas. That's Cameron Stewart from ESPN Central Texas of Locked On Baylor. Let's talk Baylor. Let's talk Big 12. Not just hoops, but how this conference has an effect on the rest of the country in basketball specifically. Cam, I was sitting down, and you might want to sit down when you
love sitting down, man. Sitting down rocks.
I might sound maniacal with this one, but I started thinking, the SEC. We always scream the SEC is the best conference in football, right? They take over. They're the ones that have dominated the last 2 decades. What the Big 12 is doing in basketball is more dramatic than what the SEC's done in football. And instead of getting rid of 2 teams that are really good in the conference, where in football, I get how Oklahoma and Texas have been good. In basketball, we're losing semi-dead weight. What we are building, especially when you bring in an Arizona and a Utah even who's good now, and Colorado has not been bad. And I think Bob Hurley's still at Arizona State. Brother,
I don't know about that.
The new Big 12 could be so good that it starts to alter how college basketball is played at the top level, because this conference is a super conference that 12 teams will probably deserve to have at least a shot at March Madness in, and that's not fair to the rest of the country.
I mean, look, just adding one of those teams that's in the top 5, top 10 at worst, we're already done. We've already hit the point that you're trying to make right there. And the thing is, with the SEC in football, they have added some superpowers with UT and OU. But before that, it was all the Big 10. All the SEC was doing was just being really, really, really good. So the timeline is very similar there. All the Big 12 has been doing, stewing for the last 10 years, has just been those middle of the pack and even some lower pack teams that you guys could walk all over, they're now really good too. Baylor in the middle of the pack, TCU at the bottom of the pile, Tech at the bottom of the pile. Look at these guys now. And now, okay, we're going to go add. And I don't know about those other programs. I don't know how Utah keeps up. I don't know how Colorado keeps up. Then again, I would have said the same thing about TCU in basketball a few years ago.
Or about BYU
or BYU,
Cincinnati and UCF.
Yeah.
Like that to me is what makes it so wild. I made the case 5 months ago. Somebody asked me, said, do you like that these 4 new teams are coming into Big 12 in basketball? And I said, yeah, I just feel like it's
these 4 this year.
Not the 4 this year. The 4 that are in it now, BYU included. I was like, yeah, but it's going to create more quad 4 games. It's going to create that's going to bury 2 or 3 of these teams at the very bottom of the conference and give you a winnable game. Now UCF at home is going to be a cakewalk. And it's not. I did 2 of those 4, 3 of those 4 might make the NCAA tournament. 4 of those 4 are at least in the conversation. That is unbelievable.
It's incredible. I mean, UCF is one of the stories of the year in college basketball and in this conference. And I don't even know if they're going to go 500 in this conference. Doesn't matter. That's already, if they're winning 45% of the games in the conference, that is stunning to me.
Tournament. You go to March.
Yes, which they have done twice in 25 years. This is not a basketball school, but they're hanging with everybody. Shout out Johnny Dawkins, man. And the BYU point too. I mean, they hadn't been a real contender, a real, hey, let's make a run in March Madness type of team.
They were kind of
Jimmer, man.
In the WCC, in a bad conference.
It had been years, and all of a sudden they think, well, go to the Big 12. Let's change our style of play a little bit. And it's worked. We talked just before the conference season started about BYU and Oklahoma and some of these other teams that you're like, are they actually going to be for real? They were good in the non-con. And I think the biggest wait and see was BYU. And we have waited. We have saw they are absolutely a ranked team. They deserve to continue to be in the rankings. What an adjustment to the toughest conference in America.
If we put, and the only way to convey this is to put it in football terms, in my opinion.
They'll ask you to do that on Twitter anyway, so you're getting ahead of it.
True. Ohio State and Michigan into the SEC and took out Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. If we put Oregon, maybe like a USC, just a power brand, right? And we created the ultimate football conference. Everyone in America would cry and moan because that's unfair and kills the sport. We are doing that in college basketball, and it's the Big 12. I fear we get a year down the road and people go, this isn't good.
So, okay, let me follow this example here. So you use Mississippi State and Vanderbilt football.
Yeah, I did. Yep.
To relay the number 11 team in men's basketball, who just lost to the other team that's getting cooked and went to the Elite Eight last year. Am I following that right? Are we using Oklahoma and Texas in these examples here?
I am not. And people who have ever been to a game in Norman, like a basketball game in Norman, know exactly.
They might not know if they were there.
Sucks. And Oklahoma basketball at its, even with like the Buddy Hield and Lon Kruger, they hit a peak of a Final Four, and that's awesome. But Oklahoma's never going to be a basketball powerhouse.
Nope,
and Texas has been a perennial. They've never won a national championship, unlike the Baylor Bears, and they perennially underachieve, somehow more so in basketball than they do in football. Because it's maybe the worst you can get is, you actually get to go there. They get to go to March, right, and they lose in round 1 to an Abilene Christian who gets to put those posters all over the airport. To me, I don't mind comparing Oklahoma and Texas to lower level teams.
Yeah, I don't think they're terrible, but to your point, I think is they are not the consistent powers in this conference. Like there are some other teams since the conference really took the turn, I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, to being the best, that have stuck around. And Baylor and Houston, by comparison, are going to be programs that stick around and are consistently good and in the top 25, whereas you cannot bank on that with Oklahoma or Texas. Weirdly enough, with all the deep pockets they have, you can't bank on that.
Can I retry? Can I spin the wheel again? Can I spin the wheel again? Luck be in the air tonight. I'll change it. South Carolina and Arkansas.
Okay.
We flipped those two football programs for Michigan and Ohio State. And everybody's saying, the SEC is unfair. You can't do this. We throw a Florida State in there for Mississippi State. This is unfair. We can't do that. Clemson comes in for somebody else that's in the middle tier in the SEC. Yes. Kentucky.
Yeah, I was thinking Kentucky.
Yeah. And now you're like, this dude, why would you do that? This makes college football non-competitive because there's one conference that rules everybody. That's what it is in basketball, man. And we get to be that.
Brett, baby. Brett. Yeah. This was his vision.
But don't forget, the Bowls is the one who originally put this together.
Yeah, that's true. Fine. I just don't want to give him credit. I don't.
The Bowls was the day one A1 that brought in BYU.
Todd Bowles, baby.
And Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston, who are good at basketball. And I didn't think they'd be competitive, much less.
Cincinnati is going to be a damn good team in 2 years.
Wes Miller, man.
I believe in the Wes Miller train.
I don't believe in ESPN Plus. Like some people are agnostic, some people are Christian, some people are Buddhist. I am a non-believer specifically in one thing, and that's ESPN Plus. The rest of my religious affiliations, I'll keep quiet. But this one I am very passionate about. I'm Locked On Big 12. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show, it is brought to all of you by Gametime. Gametime's the place that I go. It's like, man, I need to go somewhere. Gametime. Literally, because they have tickets to everything. Concerts, sporting events. You can go to the theater. Right now, Gametime is the fast and easy way, and they give you $100 off when you buy a Gametime ticket with code Vegas100. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Gametime.co, Gametime app, Vegas 10, 100. Vegas 100, you get $100 off. Does that make sense? 100. Last minute tickets. Easy to find and buy tickets. Views from all the seats in the venue. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. And even an hour after it starts, it is the place to find last-minute tickets. So what can you do? Extra $100 in Vegas. You use Vegas 100, you get $100 in Vegas. That's awesome. So go there for the big game, the Super Bowl. Go to Vegas, get $100 off your Super Bowl ticket. Right now, Gametime users get $100 off a big game with ticket code Vegas100. Vegas100. Gametime. Download the app. Easy to use. Fun to play. I hate ESPN Plus. I decided after watching the BYU game this week and not being able to hear the crowd that I know was good. I know it was good. But ESPN was just like, you know what? Let's make it sound like everybody's in a can and the crowd doesn't exist. I have always known that I've hated ESPN Plus. But can we at some point talk about how the two things in this conference that irk me the most? The officiating, which is awful. Awful. And
I've
the
heard
fact
that
that I've got to chase down Big 12 basketball. Again this weekend, a top 20 game between Texas Tech and Oklahoma in Norman. Now, and nobody's going to go, much less are they going to go. No Oklahoma fans going to go, much less are they going to go find on ESPN Plus.
Maybe that's why they did it. This has to help the gate, right?
Sure.
Fine. ESPN Plus is weirdly like the hardest of these streaming apps to not want to throw out the window.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's
what I'm here for.
Have you ever gone on to watch an event on ESPN Plus? Can everybody reason with this? Have you ever gone on to watch an event on ESPN Plus and actually saw kickoff or tip-off?
Never.
I don't know
hey,
that
I
was have.
Easy.
Yeah.
Never.
Not once. You go and it says your event is starting soon. You're like, oh, it was supposed to start 10 minutes ago. Turns out there are 14 minutes left in the first half.
That literally happened with a Baylor game last year. They just didn't show like the first 10 or 12 minutes of gameplay. And everyone was like, what the hell is going on here? That happens all the time. And there's sometimes where you get there, like right, if it's a 2 o'clock tip off, you get there right at 2 o'clock and it's not on live or upcoming and it's not on upcoming. And you're like, does this even exist? It's never been easy. And it wants you to confirm your credentials every single time. Like even if you're just already logged in, but going to click on another game, they'll make you do it again. It's the worst. It is the worst. I'm glad that it allows every game to be covered in the Big 12, but it ends up being such a freaking headache, man.
It is. And like Kansas State and Iowa State. You know, BYU, you talk about the BYU game, and that's one that I circled. Was like, this is terrible. Kansas State, Iowa State. What a game the rest of the country could watch. And then I go and I turn on ESPN, and it's, on hockey or, midweek hockey. Or I go and I turn on ESPN, and they're doing like an NFL preview. What?
Susie Colbert's on my screen.
What are we doing?
Kansas State, man.
Why can't I just have Big 12 basketball? And this makes me think, and I do see it pretty often, it feels like the SEC gets a more favorable shake at this because they have the SEC network, and I usually see them. I don't know what it is. I don't know if Auburn plays 5 times a week. Every time I turn on ESPN, Auburn's playing basketball, whether it's men's or women's. And that's just the way the SEC contract goes, I guess. But I don't understand at what point does ESPN see, like, we had this conversation in the first segment. This conference has more eyeballs than any conference in America and the best teams in the country. Man. Why do I have to go to ESPN Plus to get the biggest games? And why can't we know, like, football? What's the most pageantry, the biggest product, the biggest moneymaker in college athletics?
Football?
And when do we learn the time of those games?
Usually like an hour before.
Like 45 minutes before kickoff. And in basketball, before anybody touches the hardwood, years in advance, they go, you know what? That game between Kansas and Baylor, ESPN Plus it.
5 o'clock p.m.
It's like they built it in 2001. I don't understand how football they can get it. And even, you know what? This segment's brought to you by FS1, who I have not had a lot of problems with aside from that Baylor women's basketball game.
Except for the fact that, A, my team has always lost anytime they've ever been on FS1 ever. And second off, yes, watching that Baylor Kansas State women's basketball game. I know there will be people saying, oh, it's just women's basketball. It is a top 15 matchup on a Monday night where you used to have a whole great lineup of college basketball. You don't anymore. And I can't even see half the screen for half the game and have it's glitching. It's got half a green screen on it. Like, you can't understand what anybody's saying. It's the worst viewing experience I've had all year, Drake, of any sport. That was it.
Can we not just have nice things?
And I watched Twilight this year, and that was the worst viewing experience I've had was that Baylor Kansas State women's basketball game. I enjoyed Twilight with how bad it was.
Why didn't you go to the game?
Oh, that's a great question, man. I must just be watching too much hockey. I don't know.
You probably are. You forgot. Like, I got caught watching the Bruins game, and you were late. That must. That
was a great Bruins game that night. Beat the league-leading Jets at the time Jets. You can't say that often. League-leading Jets. Anyway, I think I'm a believer in Big Dong Brett here. Big Dong Brett is cooking. He is working something out. The guy's whole deal is just entertainment.
Yeah. With
sports attached to it. He can't let this go on. I'm looking at tomorrow's games, and there are, in my mind, 3 really intriguing, if not 3 really good matchups. 2 ranked ones, and then Kansas State, Houston. And they're all within 2 hours, so they're all overlapping. And one of them, the one you've already mentioned, Tech at Oklahoma, top 20 matchup, ESPN Plus. Plus what? Can we flex a game out of another ESPN network? They can't do that. Texas and BYU's on ESPN too. That's way too big a fan base. How about ESPNU? How about the Ocho? Can we flex it out?
Classic. Give me ESPN Classic.
Oh,
ABC. UCF and Cincinnati is the nightcap in the Big 12. And no hate.
And can we spread these out though? Can we spread these out, Drake?
Right. That's what. There's only one nightcap, and it's
nothing against UCF. But come on, guys.
I don't need that to be the marquee game.
Why isn't BYU the nightcap? That's easy, bro.
And the nightcap is on ESPN Plus.
Coming ready to learn ESPN Plus, buddy. That's what we're telling to Arizona and Colorado, baby.
Is Baylor and look, Baylor's on a skid. Will they beat TCU? I think they should. But maybe the more important question is Baylor elite. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Guess what? Yeah. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go to make money. I like money. And with the NFL regular season all wrapped up, we are in the playoffs, the yachts, and America's #1 sportsbook is right here for you. New customers get $150 in bonus bets. Guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's right, $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find best bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the NFL. Baylor men's basketball, TCU this weekend. Big enough game because TCU is sneaky good in the Big 12. And Baylor is what? Like if you had to describe what Baylor is, because I think Kansas has the best starting 5 in the league. BYU is the best offensive team in the league. Houston's the best defensive team in the league. Where does Baylor fit into this conference right now?
It's a great question, Drake. They're edging, okay? They are still in that top tier, but they are not a finished product.
They're edging hard.
Is the way I'm optimistically looking at it.
Okay.
I had to be talked back down this week on Locked On Baylor, coming off the 2 straight losses. Both games I thought they should have won, especially the UT game last Saturday that came down to the buzzer beater. They still have the talent on this team that makes them better than last year's team, which we'd agree was a bit of an underachiever. And I looked this week, Drake, because a lot of Baylor fans, and I understand this. I was definitely one of them. We'll compare every team now to that 2021 national championship team. That team was one of the best teams this century in college basketball.
Yes.
Like there's No ifs, ands, or buts to that. So I looked at the statistical comparison and where they rank, and they actually are a lot closer than I thought. Like the rebounding differential is basically the same. The 3-point shooting is similar, although that 2021 team was number one basically the whole year. So it's not that far off. But then there are some other big ones, like in conference, they were winning by 14 points a game, which is just absurd. It's insane. Even when you had those Bruce Weber, Kansas State teams in the early aughts, Iowa State teams in there, that's still insane. And so I'm thinking, okay, let me compare this to something else. You remember last year's UConn team?
I think so, yes.
They won 6 games in the NCAA tournament, each by double digits. Is it one of the best teams this century? No, but one of the best runs this century, absolutely. So I compared them and those stats that we all love. Coaches love them too when you're talking about playoff basketball, right? Offensive rebounding, turnover differential, true shooting. Baylor beat them in all of those categories. So I'm not just going to say Baylor's going to go and win the national championship. There's a lot that goes into that. But statistically, they are a team that can make a deep run, if not win a national championship. They are still on that statistical pace. In fact, UConn last year was out-turnovered every game by the averages. They were turning it over more than they were forcing, and Baylor's still +3 in that category. So all of those things that we love to see in a national champion, Baylor's still well off in statistically. Now, that said, that doesn't mean there aren't holes in the team. They're still getting better defensively. 1 field goal in the last 8 minutes against Texas last Saturday.
Bad.
For what we're supposed to be thinking of as a top 10 offensive team, because they are still top 10 in a ton of categories in the nation. Can't think that way anymore. They need to get better at that. And the thing I think that is missing right now that vintage Scott Drew teams have had, I know there's some Big 12 fans who will revel in this. I don't know if it was all Jerome Tang, but it's starting to look that way in terms of set plays. Baylor was always, even when they were just a good team, not a great team, always really good out of a timeout. Yeah. Fran Fraschilla would fall all over himself talking about how good they were out of timeouts, right? Mm-hmm. And they were. He was right. The last 2 years hadn't been there. And when they need that basket, they haven't had a play for it, because this was the same problem they had last year too. And I said it in after the Kansas State game, weirdly enough, against Tang. Baylor got the ball with 20 seconds left in a tie game, and I'm like, why aren't they calling a timeout here? Cincinnati in the last game before against Baylor called a timeout in this situation and drew up a great freaking play. They didn't score, but they had an awesome look at the basket. Why isn't Baylor doing that? I don't know. So that gives me pause for concern, but they are still in.
They'd even use the Texas timeout example where you could call a timeout against Texas and stop the game-winning bucket.
Yeah, which in hindsight, obviously they should have done. You do give Rodney Terry another opportunity with the whiteboard. We know.
Oh no, not Rodney Terry.
This guy he is, man. That's like giving Krzyzewski another shot.
Not Rodney Terry. No.
Well, I came back to the point that your defense should be able to stop that.
Yeah.
If I'm a coach, I should be able to trust.
Well, you can't have Jacoby Walter guarding a guy who is physically incapable of scoring tightly on the 3-point line. I would rather that guy airball a 3 than the opposing team hit a game-winning shot.
I'll give him a look. Yeah. So still in that upper echelon to answer your last question, to your first.
Then
question.
Before we close, I think TCU reminds me a lot of Baylor. TCU reminds me a lot, and they may not have had a better non-conference. I think that's why the two teams are ranked where they are. Mm-hmm. But I think TCU, the same team that won in Waco last year, gives Baylor a run for its money on Saturday.
I think it's a tough game. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't just say this is going to be a W, even though it should be for Baylor. TCU is this classic example of what the Big 12 is now, because last week, how much were we praising them, as they should have been? Mm-hmm. And then 2 tight losses later, and now the experts are saying, including their own people, Frogs of War, that they need a couple wins just to feel good about making the tournament right now.
Yep.
They are a tournament team. They absolutely have the talent to do it, and they've had some big wins on the schedule so far. So Baylor gets the week off going into this game. They hadn't played since last Saturday against Texas. We'll see if that's good or
How
bad.
do you see how you saw what big breaks could do for Baylor when they played Michigan State?
Yes, we'll see if that's good or bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good. It's good in that there's a reset in the middle of the season, which all Big 12 teams will get. They'll all get that week off at some
middle of
point.
the season.
Yeah.
This usually comes in February, if not early March, but not this year.
And it's a way to kind of, figure some things out and rest the body a little bit. But there could be some rust. Who knows, man? I'm going to be at the Foster Pavilion tomorrow. Bought a ticket.
Yeah, you did.
2 tickets.
Do you know? What's interesting to me is that the media and fans have access to the same Wi-Fi in the Foster Pavilion.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, anybody in that stadium could just like stream things on their phone during timeouts if they wanted to. You could watch a TV show or live sports or anything that you wanted to.
ESPN Plus.
ESPN Plus, which is the carrier provider for a couple of national leagues.
Yeah.
That's Cameron Stewart of Locked On.
Out of market. Yeah, that's great.
Locked On Baylor at ESPN Central Texas. I'm Drake Toll. Today I'm going to announce what my new job is. Finally.
What? On a Friday, loser, man? Nobody's going to see it.
2 months. That's what I said. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande. Baylor. Say Baylor. Say it.
Baylor.
Bears.